Both countries argued such people pose a security risk. Now, the original program sought to ease pressure on nations that deal with mass arrivals. The court said the process was appropriate. Well, Sarah Morice can join us now live from London with more on that ruling. So, Sarah, where does this leave things? Where can these states go from here? Will they have to accept the refugee quota now or face sanctions?
Yes, well, it's still yet to be determined exactly what will happen. What's happened this morning is an advisor to the EU court has said that he thinks the migrant quota scheme should be upheld. So let's backtrack here a little bit. And you'll remember that the eastern states, led by Slovakia and also by Hungary, backed by Poland, have been fighting in the court to overrule this decision that migrant quotas must be placed on all the European Union members so they can share the burden of the sheer numbers of migrants that arrived in the EU. Of course, they say it's unlawful, they shouldn't have to do this, and they've been fighting it in court. We know that the EU has been threatening to put sanctions on them if they don't take their fair share of migrants, and so far they haven't taken any migrants into their countries. So this advisor to the court has now said he thinks that they don't have a leg to stand on and that these quotas should actually be upheld. Now, that will need to go to court, and we will find out exactly what the court rules on that in due time. But also, just to muddy the waters, Andrea, there's been another court case that has been ruled on, and this has been all about where a migrant's asylum should be processed. So it's all getting quite confusing, but basically it's a test case. There's a rule in European law whereby if a migrant or a refugee arrives in an EU country, that first country they arrive in is where they must apply for asylum. Now, if they find themselves in a different country and that country doesn't give them asylum within Europe, then they can be deported back to that country of first entry. So what we've had now is Austria and Slovenia challenging this rule because during the migrant crisis of 2015, Croatia particularly allowed and in fact offered transport to many refugees to move through their country. So they ended up in Austria. Many were on their way to Germany, but some wanted to stay in Austria. Austria says, well, if we're not giving them asylum, we want to deport them back to Croatia. I told you it gets confusing. Well, there's a couple of particular families, an Afghanistan family and a Syrian man. This was a test case for them, and the court has ruled that, in fact, they can be deported back to that country of first entry.
And it did. It boiled down to this case being about really two Afghan families and one Syrian man, but having much wider implications than that.
That's exactly right. So when we spoke before a moment about the quotas, you can see that migration is such a touchy issue in the European Union, and that's not going to change. This will add, this ruling this morning about country of entry will add to that tension as well. There are about 100 or so, a couple of hundred perhaps, people who fall into the same category as that two Afghanistan families and the one Syrian man who was shipped back to Croatia. So their stories and the people like them will now be affected. This is probably a precedent, and they will probably find themselves shipped back to their country of first entry within the European Union. On top of that, though, as we mentioned, it really muddies the water again. It increases the tensions that are already in place surrounding the whole migration issue in Europe.